Hey folks, this is Mark Emery with the Lighthouse Law Club. This is part 2 of an ongoing series where we are uncovering the fraud of the banksters. Watch this interview of Alex Jones with Randy Kelton and you'll begin to understand some of the fundamental fraud. We have a lot more to come, so stay tuned for further episodes.
All right, with us into the Overdrive fourth hour today is Randy Kelton. I remember 10 years ago researching mortgage fraud and hearing about how they were selling the mortgages over and over again at different institutions as derivatives. This all really kicked off 11 years ago with the end of Glass-Steagall that Bill Clinton honchoed through with the Republicans as well in 1999. So it allows them to go away from fractional reserve banking, where a bank can loan out $10 for every dollar it's got in holdings, to just unlimited. And they've now created 1.5 quadrillion, 1,500 quadrillion dollars conservatively. That number's about a year old. So it's impossible to ever pay this back. But they hold the economy hostage, saying, give us trillions more, which they then use for bonuses. Wall Street's record profits, the bank's record profits, everybody else worldwide going into a black hole. And now it's confirmed. CNN's reported it. We played the clips. People's homes who were paid for are being taken. Multiple banks are trying to foreclose on the same house. Or Obama claimed he had this plan to let people renegotiate. They go in to renegotiate, sign papers, then they take the house. Just every form of criminality going on. So a few months ago, it's like conspiracy theorists. I saw headlines. Conspiracy theorists and patriots are filing paper terrorism and lying and saying that banks are taking homes without the deeds. This is a lie. That's just 2 months ago. Now, everywhere, AP, Reuters, headlines, Bank of America suspends all foreclosures. The other 4 big banks suspend as well. Government, Harry Reid calls on Obama to suspend it. Mortgage fraud, BBC headline, Obama to allow banks to continue mortgage fraud. But to quantify this and to cover a wide spectrum of it is Randy Kelton, because I've been studying this for 10 years since I learned about it. I mean, people were telling me about this 10 years ago, and I've done research and don't want to give advice about mortgages because it's very complex. But over time, I've learned quite a bit. And I like Randy because he's a pro se litigant and researcher. It means he's not a lawyer, but he does advise lawyers and many others. He has his own radio show on ruleoflawradio.com. And Randy's an Austinite. I've interviewed him many years ago before, and he stood up against corrupt police. And that's where he started, was in the trenches, just dealing with the Bill of Rights and common law. And this mortgage situation over the last 5 years gets brought to him so much, he's researched it, and he's researched the cases that have been won, the cases that have been lost. They've had I'd say 90+% success rate blocking foreclosures with just simple things they do. But he will tell you there's no silver bullet. The courts are incredibly corrupt. Anybody, and I hear this all over talk radio, I hear it everywhere, and I hear it on other shows on this network, saying, and I'm not trying to attack people, maybe it's going to work. But the point is, when they say 100%, we can fix it, send us $10,000. In my opinion, don't walk, don't run, sprint away from that, okay? I like Randy because he just goes off the facts, and he's so busy, he won't even usually even take more people to help because he's overwhelmed. That's the mark of somebody real. But regardless, I want Randy to have the floor and spend the first few segments quantifying how the mortgages work, what the mirror system is, why all this is coming to a head, the announcement that they've passed the law. CNBC on Monday had the headline, CNBC analyst predicts that Obama will legalize mortgage fraud. Well, they already passed the law 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. Obama has pocket vetoed. He didn't get rid of it. He just set it aside till after the election. So just like Bush got caught with warrantless wiretapping on Americans and lied about it, they then had Congress pass a law retroactively making it legal. But if they do this, there's no confidence in mortgages, private property. This is so big. A lot of people are like, well, I don't have a bad mortgage. Folks, they're taking houses that are paid for. This is on mainstream news. In fact, we can search the term. Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan, both will do it. Takes house that they didn't even own. Court rules against them taking house that was paid for that they didn't have a deed to. Because the Chinese, the Europeans, individual pension funds, you're hearing they're in trouble now. They've all been sold this. So, Randy, let's go over how a mortgage really works, what this does to the fundamentals of land ownership in this country. One of the things that made us so great, you could get clearer title here, than anywhere else in the world. And what this means, this total shift and where you see it going. So let's go over mortgages, and then just of the cornucopia, some of the biggest scams they're running.
Yes. Quickly, I'll go through how the mortgages work. In the late 80s, early 90s, first Clinton and then Bush, under the guise of making housing available to the poor, removed two primary protections that lenders had that restricted the actions of the, restricted the actions of the lenders to protect the borrowers. Instead of making houses available to the poor, what they did was went to people in good, stable loans, building equity in their houses, and convinced them to do the one thing that had always been taboo, to speculate with your home. Oh, yeah, look at this. The market is going straight up. You sell this crummy old house you're in, buy this real expensive one you can't afford. Don't worry about it. A couple of years, price will go up. You'll be inverted. You can get a new loan on it. You'll have so much equity in it, you'll owe almost nothing. People bought this story. They thought that the mortgage industry was increasing, that the demand for property was increasing. It wasn't an increase in demand. It talked all these people again to getting out of the houses they were in and moving into another one, so it was a movement. And the movement created a bubble. They knew full well it was creating a bubble. At about the same time, somebody come up with this great idea. We have all of these investment funds, primarily your retirement and my retirement. All of this money building up in these long-term funds that need a place to invest. And they come up with a great idea how to strip all of it. First, we strip the equity from the property owner by getting him to sell his property and commit his equity to a new purchase that the lender intends they cannot pay. And then we sell this as a security into an investment pool and get the borrower's employers to invest their retirement fund in the investment pool, and in the end game, we'll steal it all, and that's exactly what they're doing.
And we saw them in 07, the very financial publications that have promoted this fraud, we saw them start to bash the housing system and purposefully cause the bubble to pop. Then we saw in October of 08, Paulson and others, the head of the Treasury, the head of the Federal Reserve, come out and badmouth and say we're going into a depression to further destroy confidence because there was so much irrational exuberance that they'd injected into us that people weren't popping the bubble. And so they came in and popped it themselves.
Precisely. And there was one other thing that occurred that allowed this to happen. In 1907, there was a major stock market crash. This crash was caused because people were allowed to invest in a stock without owning it. They could go into what they called a bucket shop. You can look on the internet and do a search for financial weapons of mass destruction.
It's kind of like naked shorting.
Yeah, and 60 Minutes did a little section on this. After the crash of 1907, the legislature said, no more of that, it's felony to do it. Last thing the legislature did in the year 2000 was remove that restriction. Then the banksters could start selling derivatives again. This is absolutely unregulated speculation. So a lender goes to you and induces you into a loan that you cannot pay. And it is his intent that you cannot pay it. Most people, when they hear that, they think of a mortgage company like we think of It's a Wonderful Life, where a bank gathers funds from the neighborhood, loans out those funds, collects them back over time at a profit. After these changes in the late 90s, that's not what happened anymore. Now there was an opportunity for a lender, for someone to go into business as a mortgage company. Go to a large lender, Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, get a large loan, convert that loan into 20 and 30-year mortgages. Problem they had is they had to pay that loan back within 6 to 9 months. So they never had any intention of keeping the loan. They go to the seller, extract a loan from their credit line, give the seller a promissory note with instant value, present value, check. They, in return for the title, they take the title, they trade it to the buyer for a promissory note with no present value, but with increased future value. Well, they need present value, pay back the bank. So they take that and sell it to an investment pool. Special purpose vehicle. A special purpose vehicle created for the purpose of gathering together a bunch of loans into a single pool, and then they file it with the IRS as a real estate mortgage investment conduit.
And they filed it as derivatives with no deed.
Yeah, well, they get it there. And the problem with it, that would have been bad enough, but they didn't just sell it to a special purpose vehicle. They sold it to lots of special purpose vehicles, selling the same note 20 to 30 times. It was just an unregulated glut on the market.
And that's what the media is just now getting around to admitting. That's why you'll have 2, 3, 4, 5 banks trying to foreclose on the same apartment house or the same home or the same golf course, because there's an even bigger swindle. They didn't just AAA rate bad mortgages to people that couldn't pay it back. That was just the vector point where the epicenter. The real fraud is they've sold these over and over again in literal counterfeiting.
Exactly. Most people think that the banks defrauded them. What they did to you is chump change. The one they're really after is the backside investor. That's the one they really defrauded, and they created your note as a vehicle to perpetrate the further fraud. And in the process of doing it, the more expensive they could create, more expensive a loan product they could create, the more profit they made immediately when they sold it to the investor.
Because all these different investment vehicles, as they pass it on the line, they're getting fees.
Yes, and they do more than that. They gather these together, and they monitor the income streams. What they guarantee to the investor is an income stream. So if one's producing well, then the other one's not, they do credit default swaps.
All right, well, stay there. Let's continue. And they have fake insurance put on it, and that's something else they sell. We'll be right back. Kelton, 57-year-old father, grandfather, Vietnam veteran, crusader against corrupt courts, really researching the mortgage situation. So, Randy, they've sold all these derivatives now, China, the EU, pension funds, and they told us back in October of 2 years ago, they said, oh, we're going to need these billions, these trillions to unfreeze mortgages. But the day after October 4th, Paulson said, we're going to spend it on something else, we're not going to tell you. Then they didn't even fix the derivatives problem. They took it as bonuses, and now here we are 2 years later. Let's go over what's happening in courts, why they're stopping many of the foreclosures now, why they're trying to get Obama to sign a law to legalize all this, because I know most of the fraud's at the institutional level and pension level, but individually, the 100,000 homes in foreclosure a month, according to the federal government, at record levels. What is, in the gamut, what are some of the most common frauds the banks are engaged in?
One of the first things they do is they convince the loan broker, the person who brings the customer to the lender, they convince him to breach his fiduciary duty to the borrower by lying to him and telling him that the property is worth a whole lot more than it is. And you tend to believe that because the appraiser will appraise it for a whole lot more than it's worth.
So there's systemic fraud.
Yeah, and the appraiser will appraise it for a whole lot more than it's worth because only the banks can hire appraisers by the bank's rules. This way they get to increase the initial amount of the value of the property. They get to increase the initial amount of the loan, and they collect fees at closing. If anybody has a loan here, you look at your HUD-1 settlement statement and list all the fees they charged you. Good portion of those are forbidden to be charged to you. They charge those to you, then take those fees, give them to the broker under the table. The broker who brings you the loan is only allowed to receive 1% of the principal of the note as a commission. That's so that everywhere the broker looks, everybody's going to pay him the same. However, the lenders are sliding the money under the table to get them to lie to the borrower and bring him a more expensive loan product. When they do that, then the lender can take the loan. As soon as you sign it, he's going to take it and sell it. He will receive consideration from the investor, but he keeps the lien. He'll sell the note. The note is it's like a check. You write a check, that's a security instrument. You write a note, that's a security instrument that doesn't get collected all in one moment. It gets collected monthly over a period of years. Essentially, it's the same thing. So he takes that check and he sells it to the investor, but he doesn't give him the lien document, the document that is there to protect him in case you don't pay. And it took a long time to figure that out because the Supreme Court of Kansas addressed this issue, and they said, while you can separate these two, it's legal. But if you do that, then you've created a fatal flaw in that the guy who purchased the security instrument, he has a claim against the property. But no, I'm sorry, he has a claim against the signator on the note, the guy who signed it, but no claim against the property. The lender holding the lien, he has a claim against the property, but he received consideration. He can't be harmed. So the lien's void.
So that's how you have multiple banks coming after the same property.
Oh, they'll get, no, what the lender then did, the special purpose vehicle that purchased the note, he combined it into a whole bunch of different pools. Instead of one real estate mortgage investment conduit, he combined it into a whole bunch of them and sold them over and over again. So he got multiple consideration for the note. What we're saying is even if you didn't pay the note, and even if the payment is owed, the question becomes, who's it owed to? Who actually owns it?
So that's how they're taking houses that are completely paid for, because it doesn't matter, because somebody else can claim they have some type of ownership to it.
Exactly. We have a guy in California that Bank of America came and took his house. 2 months later, Chase came and tried to take his house. They all think they own it. They've sold it to everybody. But the question I had was, why would the lender keep the security, keep the lien, if it caused this much of a problem? He kept it because he'll hold it for 3 years, file a trustee IRS Form 1099-A, write it all off his capital gains tax as abandoned funds. He gets consideration a second time. And then once he sells the note to the investor, he becomes the servicer of the note. If you pay the note on time, he gets 3% of the payment. Pay it late, he gets an extra 5%. It is in his best interest to create a loan the borrower has to struggle to pay and regularly pays late. And if you default, he'll make about 50 grand on the default. Actually, he'll make more than that. It's too complex here to explain that.
And they had to know it was going to destroy the economy when this went belly up, but don't worry, they've got the next answer. Give the bankers global government power, have global VAT taxes, carbon taxes to create the new global bubble. We'll be back. Long 18-minute segment coming up. I'm Alex Jones with Randy Kelton. We're going to be going into overdrive the full fourth hour at Infowars.com and carried by all of our wonderful affiliates. Randy Kelton, pro se litigant and researcher, is here with us. So we're going through what these derivatives are, how this is working. We were talking during the break, clearly engineered by design. Then we're not going to just look at the fraud, at the home buyer level and what this is going to do to society, but also the international fraud, the real fraud, and what dwarfs the original genesis of all of this, but continue walking through this, and then let's get into how the banks are losing in court now, and what it's going to do if the government comes out and says, look, banks can take any houses they want. It doesn't matter if it's all illegal. We've got to let them do this. Too big to fail.
Yes. I hear that might happen, but somehow I think it won't. I think it's worse than I would imagine. I tend not to like conspiracy theories. I don't want it to be that way. But this one was forced down my throat. All of these things are too well engineered to have happened by mistake. They just all fit together. The biggest problem I'll get to in a moment. The lender He's this sharp point of the spear. He's the one that convinced the individual to go into a loan product he could not afford, and he did it because he profited at every turn. He profited when he sold the note. He profited when he filed the 1099-A. He profited when you paid late. He profited when you default, and all of that was chump change. The real profit he got, the credit default swaps, are essentially a form of insurance. If you look at your HUD-1 settlement statement, you'll see mortgage MPI, mortgage insurance protection. If you default on the note, the insurance company will pay him 80% of the principal based on that insurance premium. What you don't know is on the derivatives market, he'll get another 8 to 10 of those. Anybody who thinks your lender is going to give you a modification, you are dreaming.
That's coming out in the news now, that they do these bait and switches. Oh, there's a federal program, and people are going in to modify, and then they're baiting and switching and then grabbing the house right there.
Yes, I have a quick story of a friend of mine, happened to a friend of mine, and I've read exactly the same story 3 times. We're going to modify. I said, they're not going to modify, Ken. Oh, yeah, they're going to modify. Sue them, Ken. No, they're going to modify. They're going to help me. No, they're going to screw you. So he's going to modify. They tell him there's 2 documents that we need, but we don't know what they are. He spent 6 weeks trying to find out what they were. On a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, they called him and told him, you didn't get us those 2 documents, so we denied your modification. They sold his house within minutes. I've read this in 3 separate lawsuits. They set you up. Once you go in, try to go into modification, they tell you you don't qualify unless you're at least 2 payments behind. You're in modification, and you get this notice of acceleration of the note. And you say, wait, what is this? Oh, don't worry about that. Nothing.
They induce you to give them the 2 payments behind to trigger the foreclosure.
Exactly. And then they run the foreclosure while they're doing the pre-10 modification.
Well, that's like CPS in every state in the union. They also do this overseas. It's the same, unified continuity of agenda. They say, just sign these forms and agree to go to counseling and you'll get your baby back. And while they've got their own hired psychiatrist lying about you who work for them, they are already going to the court behind your back to terminate permanently parental rights. So they put you into a process to get you to sign more forms, and the whole thing is to create false hope, and it's sold to the public as a way to help your mortgage, and the whole thing is to induce more fraud.
Yeah, and even if you do get a modification, the modifications they give are designed to fail. The modification is supposed to give you a lower payment for a period of time and then go back to the original.
And the modifications have accelerated foreclosure.
Yeah, and what actually happens is it's a lower payment for a period of time, and then it shoots way up to where it's impossible to pay. After modification, miss 1 payment, your history. They can foreclose immediately, and they set you up for that. Think about it. They're going to make 8 to 10 times the amount of the principal on your note if they foreclose. That's all they care about. And they will force you into foreclosure. What we did is worked on remedy. This is all we do is remedy. It's not polite to tell somebody you have a big problem unless you show them how to fix it. And we worked on a remedy because it became so clear if we don't do something.
Yeah, let's talk about the remedies you've done that are working well. Let's talk about the other cases that are being won against these crooks that are bringing them to their knees. Why they're freezing the foreclosures.
Just got a call from one of our people today. They've done it much worse than I expected, and that scares me. Because there's something more sinister underneath all of this. Because of the way the note has been sold around to different places, who owns the note? That is an incredibly major problem. This country became a mecca for foreign investment because in this country, if you purchase a piece of property, you can trace the ownership of that property back to the original land grant. That gave foreign countries confidence that they could invest and not have their investment taken away from them. Now, with what's happening, no one knows who owns what. This will create a problem that will haunt this country for generations and plunge us into the worst depression that we've ever seen, and I suspect worse than we even imagined.
What they're doing is they are clouding property rights and property deeds in this country to have government, as they're now announcing, come in and change fundamental property law in this nation in the name of fixing it.
Yes, they're going to bring us to third world status. They will plunge us into a depression that we have no way to get out of.
And China today said they're mad about this, and the New York Times is reporting they're freezing all rare earth mineral shipments to the United States.
I'm not surprised. China really got hoodwinked on this one. And a lot of the pressure that's on Bank of America is because China's suing them in The Hague for selling them the same notes 20 and 30 times over.
Okay, so let's get into, before we cover all that, because there's so much to get into here, because there's what's happening locally, and then there's the big international scheme. But go over the successes you and many others and lawyers are having in court by going in and showing the corruption, the fraud of the lenders, of the brokers, and others, and the fact that when you just sue them or kick it into criminal, that immediately checkmates them.
Yes, and that's why I say there's no magic here. There's no magic bullet. The courts are absolutely corrupt. If you go into court, you can expect the court to rule against you out of hand at every turn. Just expect that. If you hire an attorney, he'll take your money and he'll screw you royal. You get screwed even worse with the attorney because he's your attorney and he speaks for you, so you have no objection. If you go in pro se, the courts are going to rule against you because you're pro se. However, as pro ses, we have powers and abilities beyond those of mortal attorneys. As pro ses, there are tools we have we can use, and we've put together a program to take advantage of that. I suggest people go into the federal court, sue in the federal court pro se. Now, we know the court's going to rule against us, whether we have attorney or not attorney, so having one or not is not going to help us. But as pro ses, there are things we can do. The courts hate pro ses. They don't hate pro ses because pro ses write stupid pleadings. They hate pro ses because every once in a while they come across the pro se from hell. The pro se who knows the power he has. The pro se can go after the judge and go after the other attorneys with relative impunity. And there's only one way the judge has of influencing anyone in the case. He has to influence the attorney on the other side to your benefit to get you off of his case. But in order to get there, we have to give tools to the judge that he can use. Frankly, we seem to be getting far better opinions from the judges than I had expected.
Okay, but let's just quantify this before we get into some of the things you're doing. Some of the cases that are being won, the successes you're having in blocking them. But, I mean, there's been a lot of these big cases where the banks are losing.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The judges, they're being, I've always said it's not about law, it's about politics.
Sure, but exactly. But I mean, what specifically is successful in court so far against them?
Who holds the note? First, whoever's doing the foreclosure, who are you? How do you have agency to represent the principal? And if you do have agency, even if you can prove it, most of these attorneys who are doing foreclosures don't have a contract with the principal. They just find out which loans are in foreclosure, and they just pick them up and run with them.
So they don't have real standing.
Have no standing at all. And the trick of agency cannot be proven out of the mouth of the agent. It must be proven out of the mouth of the principal, so who the heck is the principal? For the most part, the one doing the foreclosure has no clue.
And that's why the banks admit they've frozen the foreclosures. Most of the big ones have, Bank of America and the other four big ones, is because they're trying to find out who is the principal, who has standing in court.
Yes, and their problem is there's no way to do that. It's lost. 40% of all of the notes have been destroyed.
So the solution is Congress passes a law, Obama hasn't signed it yet, saying mega banks can take anything they want. They are now godlike. But then politically, to try that, that's going to cause a revolution, even with brain-dead fluoride heads. Hence, Time Magazine headline, prospect for civil war in U.S. doesn't seem that far-fetched.
Exactly. In looking at this, there may be another agenda. It may be that we're simply pawns, and to them, we're not that important. I don't see that they have, that the real money people, the Bilderbergs and the other ones behind all of these, they don't care if they sacrifice the lender. And right now, the one thing they could do to stabilize this country and still keep their money is forbid the payment of the credit default swaps, the derivatives. If the insurer can no longer pay the derivative, then the bank doesn't have that motivation to foreclose. Now it has to foreclose based on the property itself. Now,
That's why the banks haven't cared about depressing the economy by all of this and destroying their original investment, because they're getting paid to the derivative.
they're getting paid through the nose, big time. We stop that, we stop a lot of their incentive. But what we're looking at is, first thing, we create remedy. And we're stopping we've stopped over 200 so far. It takes a couple of years to get through a suit, and we've only been doing it since last November, so we haven't had any go all the way through yet. But almost everyone is still in their house, and the only ones that aren't are the ones that were so close to.
And we're going to talk about what you've done with over 200 cases, specifically with much better results than almost everybody else out there. But let's go to the people that did start this 2 years ago. We're now seeing success by pro ses, by lawyers, by law firms. And you talk about being, a plagiarist. Well, it's not plagiarism in law. It's called precedent. But so they're going in and saying, show us the note. What else are they doing?
Yes, and I say I'm a plagiarist, and that's because I'm not going out and trying to find something new, some magic trick that we can pull. I'm just looking at what people have been winning. We had 2 recent decisions in San Diego, California, where the guy filed bankruptcy and claimed that the lender had an unsecured note. And he said, oh, no, I've got a secured note. And he said, well, show it to me. Prove that you're the holder of this note. And they made no attempt to, because couldn't. They knew they couldn't. The real question, the only question, who is the true holder of the note? The holder of the note can only be the holder of the note if somebody who held it legally put it in his hand. And that person must have got it from somebody who held it legally all the way back to the original lender. And because of the glut on Wall Street, the glut of profit-taking, that it was too much trouble to keep track of all of these notes when you put 10,000 notes in one pool. And then you sell that pool to different investors. And then you swap part of the pool to another pool, another one back. The law says that the sale of a security instrument based on real property must be filed with the county recorder's office. It must be a public sale. So even if he comes to the court and says, well, I've got this note and I'm the holder of it, we go look in the county recorder's office and say, well, I don't see your name in there. So either you hold this note illegally, that you don't hold it at all, or if you do hold it, then you hold it in consequence of an ongoing criminal conspiracy to trade in illegal securities. You come to the court with dirty hands, and the court has no authority to let you profit from this illegal scheme. So either way they go, they got a problem.
Well, studying property law a little bit myself, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say properties change hands 3 or 4 times, say a piece of ranch property, but you go back to the original contract. If there was any fraud in that contract or fraud in the way the payments were done, everything is null and void, and it reverts back to whatever happened before that contract.
That's exactly where we're trying to take it, precisely. What we do is demonstrate the fraud. And in one of my seminars, an attorney came to me and she said, when I listened to you, it sounded like you were sitting in the courtroom listening to the judge chew me out because I could only claim that they didn't have standing. You didn't bring me anything specific to this note. What we do is look at the numbers. Look at the numbers they charged, the amounts they charged you at closing. When you sat down to closing, do you remember the lender bringing in documentation to prove that all the fees he charged you were authorized by law, were necessary, the amounts charged were reasonable, and that he didn't take an undisclosed markup on those fees?
Because if they did that, it breaks the law, and now the whole thing's null and void.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. What we do in developing the fraud, the first thing we want to do is look at the note and your HUD-1 your truth in lending statement. Truth in lending statement has the amount you actually pay on it. The note has what you agreed to pay. So one of the first ones I looked at, $115,900 note, 6%. Truth in lending statement called for $113,900 at 6.5%. Well, I asked Steve about that. He said, well, I saw that, but I read all these documents. My brain was dead. It looked like it would balance out. In fact, if Steve had paid what the truth in lending statement called for over the life of the note, he would overpay the note $44,000. We ran a calculation. When I first ran it, I looked at it and thought, that can't be right. I reran it. $47 overpayment every month. He would have overpaid $44,000 on a $115,000 note.
So it's just not just the fraud of the interest, it's the fraud compounded through all the extra fees they add on that is patently illegal. Stay there, we'll be right back. The globalists know this is all very complex, but it goes back to basic common law, property law in this country and worldwide. We haven't even gotten into the people that were sold the derivatives. That's the real, 1,500 trillion. And so people having their houses stolen, that's just the bottom feeders that are involved in that. This scam transcends that. That's like with fractional reserve banking. You deposit your $100, they can now loan out 1,000 fiat. Well, this is, they sell a $100,000 house and they leverage it out to hundreds of millions. Randy, this is a short segment, but continuing, they're in deep trouble to start freezing the mortgages en masse. They know that, and they're trying to figure out, some type of political remedy for this. But continuing with some of the other victories that are being had against these criminals, continue.
Okay, what we do is we create a tool you can go into court with. A tool that's very specific to your loan that sorts out the fraud in your note. And we're getting a lot of experience. We've got a couple hundred out there. We're getting a lot of responses from the court. And frankly, the responses from the court are surprising me. Initially, the courts would just blow us off. We're pro se's, they pay no attention, they just deny it out of hand. They're not doing that anymore. Whenever we get a denial, we tend to get a 4 or 5 page brief telling us precisely why they denied it, what exactly you have to give us so we can give you the ruling we want. The indication is that the politicians are turning against the lenders in order to try to buy favor with you and I. They're going into this election with a 11% approval rating. Every member of the House is up for re-election, and they can hear the toilet flushing. So the courts are asking us to give them things they can use, and that's exactly what we're doing. Generally, if you have a $300,000 note, I can generally find between 1 and 1.2 million in fraud claim against the lender. In the process of trying the case, the other side will whittle that number down, but we don't care, because we know and they know. On the front end, if they ask where we got that number, we can take them to that number to the penny, show them exactly how we got that by law. And in the end, there's only one number the lender's going to remember. I'm sorry, there's only one number the jury's going to remember. And that's the number we walked in the door with.
So to be clear, the best defense is a good offense. I mean, you stall their foreclosures, you show all the procedural error and fraud, but you also countersue on their issues of fraud to basically create a new case, and now you can depose them. Now you can force them to bring in lawyers. Now they're not just engaged in a predator action against you. Now you're fighting back.
Exactly. And we're going to go after the attorney firm, and we're going to want him to tell us who the principal is, because we want that principal deposed, and then we're going to be taking criminal charges against him to the grand jury. We'll get their attention. But first we'll take it to the district attorney. He'll refuse to act. At least we hope he does. And then we'll take it to the highest judge we can find, and he'll refuse to act. At least we hope he does. And then we'll go to the grand jury with criminal charges against the judge, accusing the judge of shielding the prosecutor from prosecution, Because the judge shielded his buddy lender from prosecution.
And by the way, this is all blustering fraud. It's like when you try to go file a complaint on a police officer, they'll tell you, get out of here, we won't let you. By law, they have to take it. So, yeah.
Exactly. What we do is we turn their procedures on their head. There are procedures in place to get you to help the police detect crime. They want you to come in and report crime. If you report crime, they'll protect you. Problem is, we start reporting crime against them, then you get these policemen doing this little chicken dance because they don't know what to do. And everybody that says anything to us that is the least bit threatening, we file against them immediately.
Back in 70 seconds with Randy Kelton, the 4th hour in overdrive. PrisonPlanet.tv. If you're being foreclosed on or your house was paid off and they took it, or multiple banks are trying to take it, you have quick, simple questions for Randy Kelton. 800-259-9231. 800-259-9231. But Randy, during the 1-minute break, you were saying, I need to make the point that stalling them, engaging them in court, that can keep you in the house for years, even if you lose, and then you end up winning by not having to pay the, the note. You end up, as the market drops, now you're punishing them. Explain that to people.
Right now, if you bought a home in say, 2007 for $300,000, try to get $200,000 for it now. You'll get more for it here in Austin than anywhere else. New York, Detroit, you couldn't sell it at all. California, you might get $100,000. Within a year and a half to 2 years, property values will drop to a third of their bubble prices. So time is on your side. And the one thing everybody complains about in civil litigation is it takes forever. And as you can see, we've been talking about this for a while, but it's beginning to happen. The longer time goes on, the more pressure is put on the lender. The more the property values drop. You file suit against the lender, you got a $300,000 property, you stop paying the lender. Take that money and put it in gold, silver, something hard. Then in a year and a half to 2 years, you go to the lender and say, yo, tell you what, either make me a deal I can't pass up, or take this property, I'll go buy the one out across the street with the money I didn't pay you. So time is on our side, and as anyone watching the news can see, pressure's on the lender. The heat is on.
Yeah, they were invincible, and now Bank of America, all foreclosures halted. The other 4 major banks, all halted, and it's happening in Europe, too.
Yes, and whether you use what I do, use what somebody else does, sue them. Go on the internet, use my favorite skill, plagiarize. Go find suits that have been filed, find the elements that match what you're doing, put together a suit and sue them, but stop them. If you don't stop them, your children and your grandchildren are going to suffer the result of it. The more people we can keep in their properties, the less severe this depression is going to be and the shorter it's going to be. We're doing everything we can to stop everyone we can as fast as we can. So however you do it, sue them. Good suit, bad suit. In the end, it matters some, but not a whole lot. It'll get everything stopped. And if you're in foreclosure, if right up the edge, if they're about to go to the courthouse steps and sell your property, go get you a red manila folder, stick it full of papers, run down on the courthouse steps. When they call your property, step up and wave that folder at them, tell them there's a claim against the property. You buy the property, you buy the claim. And it's been on the news, the problem with buying the property right now. That will stop the bank from selling to a third party. You do not want it to go to a third party. Stop that, force the bank to buy it back, sue the bank. Now you've stopped him. It doesn't statutorily stop the bank, but it realistically does. Because he has it now. If he forces you out, the property becomes empty. And he's responsible for maintaining it, and you can't insure an empty property. That's what's keeping everyone in the houses. That's the reality. Sue them quickly. As these new issues come out, the likelihood of the banks coming to the table and making a deal increased dramatically. And we need to stop as many as we can. We have about 200 in the works right now, and all but about 4 or 5 are still in their houses. One of my main people lost their house, but it was incredibly illegal. Colorado's been the worst. They don't care what the law says, or at least they didn't. They did whatever they wanted to. Now all of a sudden...
Well, by people gumming up the courts, it is forcing this fraud out in the open. And instead of people just rolling over and going, okay, take my house, and the fact that banks are taking houses that are totally paid for, and they don't have the note, the fact that they were so greedy that they aren't just taking some guy who's really upside down, they're taking people where they have no claim. We'll be right back in a few minutes. More. And again, you're dealing with criminal courts. You're dealing with a corrupt system. I go back to Bloomberg 2 months ago, and again 2 weeks ago, reports where Prudential admitted in court, which is another variant of these banks, that they and many other major insurance companies made a deal 11 years ago, right when they got rid of Glass-Steagall, to have contracts that they're allowed to break with the 6,000 dead and dying veterans from World War II up to today, and they just take their insurance money. Just like they're announcing, oh, we fired you from this job. You've been here 7 years, 10 years, 20 years. We're not going to give you your pension money now. You didn't read the fine print we changed. And I've seen them in the last 6 years changing all these rules, but they're not laws. And so the courts are there. These are politicians. They're just there to ram through whatever they're told to do. People are standing up and saying no. Now, give me an example, because you're talking about just any suit to block them for a while. But and I'm saying it varies case to case. But a few case point examples of an average mortgage with what they're doing. They've lied in the fees. They've lied in how they sold the note to others. They don't have the original note. They don't have standing. Let's say Randy Kelton owned a $300,000 house, and you were 3 months behind, and they were starting procedures to foreclose. What would you do?
First thing I would do is determine the fraud they committed when they created the note. Get you a good dollar figure to come into court with. And then look on the internet. There's plenty of information on how to make an argument that you have not proven that you have authority to raise this issue.
And again, you've got all this on your computer, and we're going to show it today. We're going to do it next week because it's so complex, because I want to load it as exhibits into our computer so we can just pull it up on screen, not just aim a camera at the screen.
Yes. I have a very large spreadsheet that I use to work out the fraud claim against the lender. And frankly, in using it, we use every stinking, rotten, low-down lawyer trick we can find. There's something real satisfying about turning this back on these guys. And they seem to be very accommodating. They seem to go out of their way to see how stupid they can be. And we greatly appreciate that, and I want to thank them for it.
Well, they've been getting away with murder for so long, they're arrogant.
They're arrogant, and they're accustomed to it. And now all of a sudden, the tide is changing. We have an opportunity.
Yeah, people have just begun to fight, and it's frozen them.
Originally, when I first started this, 95% of all mortgages went uncontested. The last figure I saw was 53%. The courts are getting flooded with suits. And that's the best thing to help us, because the courts are going to be going to these lenders and say, you got to do something to get these out of my court.
And that's going to develop more test cases to find out what's the real Achilles heel.
Yes, and the part of the difficulty were the judges. The judges were accustomed to ruling a certain way. And judges are terrified about making precedent. They don't want to be the one that the Supreme Court overrules. So they would tend to rule the way other judges have ruled. Well, now that tide is changing. We have more and more ruling in our favor.
And there's precedents against the banks now.
Exactly. And it's building. Every week we have more judges ruling against the lenders. This is a tide that's building, and we have an opportunity here. And I'm here because I want everybody to stop their mortgage, stop their foreclosure. Whether you use me, somebody else, I don't care. I got more business I can do, but do something. Do not let these people steal your property.
So, I mean, quantify it simply. I know each case is different, but so they've lied on the where they sold the mortgage. They've lied that they have standing. They've lied that they have that chain of title. They've lied in the fines and fees and broken the law. What do?
We charged them initially with civil fraud on a number of counts. It's too complex to get in all the issues. You have the Truth in Lending Act, which is generally too late to claim after 3 years, but we can still go back after them for common law fraud, for fraud by non-disclosure, breach of fiduciary duty, breach of good faith and fair dealing, In each of the states,
there's a whole family of fraud with brokerage firms, banks, assessors, and others. They're held to a higher standard when they use your ignorance against you.
Absolutely. Most people, when they go into a foreclosure issue or a mortgage issue, they only deal with licensed professionals. You deal with licensed professionals who are licensed by the government. You have a reasonable expectation of good faith and fair dealing from those people, and they turned out our government's supervisory role was just non-existent. They allowed them to do anything they wanted. But that's changing now. Now we can actually get these adjudicated. We actually had one case thrown out here in Austin by a certain judge, federal judge, whose name starts with an S, ends with a K, ends with an S, but I won't mention his name, threatened a client with sanctions if he didn't take out every reference to criminal acts by the defendants. I was astounded. We're going to prepare tampering with a witness, obstruction of justice against the judge. So you want to dance? Well, now we get to lead. But there are a few judges who haven't got it yet. But most of them around the country are beginning to realize that the political tide is changing, that the lenders have committed fraud on every case. And primarily what you've got, fraud on the front end, they lied to you, and at every case, the broker who brought the loan to you lied to you. That's enough to get the whole contract thrown out. The lender lied to you. The appraiser lied to you. The trustee lied to you. Everybody lied.
And people should have known when the appraiser and the broker and the bank comes and says, lie, honey, put this house is worth more, put on here you make more. You should know if they're telling you to lie, they're lying to you.
Yeah. And when the bank told you, oh, you can't hire an appraiser, we have to do that. Only the banks can hire an appraiser. That should be a great red flag. And it's worse than we've been had time to produce here. They produced that overinflated appraisal so that they could defraud the bankruptcy courts and the IRS on the back end. You ever notice how all of these mortgage companies are going out of business? They're creating a fortune in illegal income, and they keep bankrupting.
They move it out the back door. We had a Rich Dad, Poor Dad on it. He explained that's how this is all done. They just keep rolling the debt while the profit goes out the back door.
They get this overinflated appraisal, and then they take the product, and when the mortgage company sells the security instrument to the special purpose vehicle, it's not an arm's length transaction, as is generally the special purpose vehicle actually owns the mortgage company. And the mortgage company then reduces the value of the property to the proper value and shows a great loss on it when he sells it to the special purpose vehicle. He takes a loss on every transaction, and he goes out of business. And he hides all this extra profit. He uses the bankruptcy courts to go out of business and lose all his debt, and thereby defrauds the IRS in the process. Every single step that I've looked at.
Well, I mean, but that's what our guest was saying. He's saying the elite have written these rules for themselves, and then they control the regulators, so they're always allowed to get away with it.
We had a judge in California tell a litigant, you need to get this to the federal court because the banks have so arranged the laws in California, you have absolutely no chance.
That's another issue. You go right to federal court.
Yes, we go right to federal court. Primary reason is people are terrified of the courts. They're terrified of the banks. And when you walk into a federal court, pro se, people come away amazed at how professional, how polite, and how helpful they are. It actually gives you some confidence that there is something you can do, because there is. Helps you get over the propaganda. The more we go after them, the more the courts will start ruling in our favor. And it's happening. We're up to almost 50% of all the foreclosures are being resisted. All this easy profit's going away. Now if we can get people to start filing criminal charges against these lenders, that will bring them to the table.
Well, that's what Ron Paul and many others have said. He said he's talked about the state grand juries and others. It's up to us, we the people, to politically demand that the law be enforced and that these crooks go to jail. That would end this all out of hand very quickly.
Yes, and we have a plan to get that done. The judges and the prosecutors don't want to go after the banks because the banks invest a lot of money in their campaign funds. However, if we can put the judge on a legal dime, you know, I tell people in my seminars, when I do process seminars, when I walk into a courthouse, I'm the baddest motor scooter in the building. And there's only one reason I am, because I'm nobody. I'm not a prosecutor, a lawyer, a clerk.
Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
Well, I'm the citizen. The highest guy in the place, the judge, has no claim on me whatsoever. As a citizen walking into the courthouse, I'm the only one that can climb right down his throat. I can drag him in front of a grand jury, and there's nothing he can do about it, and they do not want you to know that.
That's right. The lawyers are all part of the bar and inside baseball. They're all playing golf together.
Exactly.
All right, we'll be right back, Randy. Stay there. We're going to take phone calls when we come back. We'll do part 2 next week. This is all powerful info. Randy next week's going to have, for PrisonPlanet.tv viewers and radio listeners, it'll be archived as well. He's going to be back in with us next, I think, Thursday. Thursday's a good day. 1 to 3 again, we'll do 2 hours, because there's just so much of this to cover. But to quantify it, and correct me if I'm wrong, if people go in and beg the lender or beg the mortgage broker or just call the police, that doesn't do anything because they know you're ignorant. And most of them are ignorant too. You know, it's just a system of ignorance. It's at the top that it's all been thought out. But by suing or by filing motions, you now put it into a whole nother arena where they actually have to at least address the law at certain levels. And so there's a record, and that stalls them. So at least you're not having to pay your rent while you're in there, and the stock and the market's going down, so they're losing in the end.
Precisely. Once you take them on, there are a lot of different supposed ways of dealing with it. One of the things that a lot of people are doing are administrative procedures. Administrative procedures look great on paper, but the lender will just ignore them because they have no legal teeth. Until you drag them into court with a summons, you don't have their attention.
You're physically taking their time now. Exactly.
And now, especially, we're taking an approach that normally isn't taken. We're taking on the criminal side as well as the civil. This judge here in Austin who saw it really didn't like it the first time he saw it. Well, sorry, Bubba, that ain't going to get better. We're going to introduce them to the criminal side. You know, the cigarette companies, the government sued them 3 times. The cigarette companies had bottomless pockets and beat them 3 times until they came back with RICO. And then the executive said, whoa, hold on here. We can go to jail over this one. Now all of a sudden they come to the table. And we intend to start bringing them to the table by bringing them before great.
Because if they broke the law on the fees and they broke the law on trying to come to take your house when they don't have the note, and the list just goes on, you've got them. Resistance is victory. It doesn't mean everybody's going to win. It means everybody standing up, or even a big percentage. I'll bring them to their knees. They're already near their knees right now, suspending most foreclosures.
Yes, and this has only happened because people were resisting. People were fighting them. People were bringing them to court and making them answer.
And because you're following the law, they've got to go to Congress to try to get the law changed. But is Congress going to make the decision to say, okay, fraud's the limit, you can do anything you want? That will destroy the entire system. So it's really
got a problem. And a while back I was in North Carolina. There was a primary runoff, 2 incumbents in the runoff. It was clear the only reason they made the runoff was because so many people ran against them, they split the vote against them. They lost terribly in the runoff, and the exit polls all said the same thing. They voted for the bailout. Congress can hear the toilet flushing. We have an incredible opportunity right now. And with them turning on the lenders, once we get a new set of representatives in, this could be the one where everybody gets flushed. Now, I understand we'll elect more politicians, and they're corrupt, but it takes them a while to get organized. And in that period in between, we have opportunity for some great change.
Yeah, our ancestors have whooped tyranny over and over again because they had a fighting spirit. And when you got right on your side, you can't be stopped.